Welcome back, guys. We're going to take a look at a little bit of conservation ecology today, how we as humans have a responsibility to conserve our environment and to be able to use it wisely so that other generations can have an environment to be able to live in or resources to be able to use. So we're going to look at that today and talk a little bit about that. So let's take a look in more detail and understand that by the end of the class period today, you're going to be able to explain biodiversity and why it's important to ecology, and understand many of the threats to biodiversity and loss of ecosystems, and hopefully be able to figure out some solutions in order to help solve some of these pressing problems that we have as a society. So the first thing we want to talk about is biodiversity, and I think I may have mentioned this a few other times, but biodiversity is simply the variety of species that exist in an area. The higher number of organisms, the higher the biodiversity. And some of the highest biodiversities are present in the picture that you see there in a coral reef. You can see many different varieties of organisms that exist within the coral reef. A good rule of thumb to remember is that the higher biodiversity is found in warmer and moist climates. So places like tropical rainforests have a significantly larger biodiversity than many other areas of the globe. Biodiversity is very important because all of these different organisms interacting has a huge impact on the populations of the organisms and has a huge impact on the abiotic and biotic factors of the region. Biodiversity has also helped humans through things like food and medicine. So biodiversity is a very important concept to ecology. Again, I think we just talked a little bit about this, but biodiversity helps bring stability and balance to an ecosystem. If we only had one variety of species, that ecosystem could not survive because energy could not flow through it, matter would not be able to flow through it either, and it provides balance for other organisms to be able to survive. Additionally, we've also been able to have significant health improvements through the ideas of biodiversity. Aspirin, which the chemical compound from that originated from willow bark, is important from biodiversity. And antibiotics that exist originally came from many different molds and fungi. We were able to use those to fight bacteria. And so the whole concept of aspirin and antibiotics came because of the different diversity of life that's present on Earth. So biodiversity is very important to humans, as well as other organisms that living within the ecosystem. So let's talk a little bit about the loss of biodiversity. What are some ways that things can be lost in an ecosystem? And one term we use is extinct. I'm sure you're very familiar with that, and that is simply just the disappearance of a species. If you look below, that is a picture of a dodo bird, and they are no longer present on this planet. It is extinct, and they will never come back. Second, we also have what's called an endangered species, and these are just species that are low in numbers. So eagles, for example, bald eagles are low in number. There aren't very many of those. California condors are low in numbers. White tigers, giant pandas, those are all endangered species, species that are threatened to go extinct because of their low numbers. What are some significant threats to biodiversity that are happening within the ecosystem? One is known as habitat degradation, and that is simply the elimination of the habitat. That is the destruction of the habitat for farming, it could be for housing, it could be for construction, it could be for many different purposes, mining even. So the elimination of a habitat is a very significant threat to biodiversity. Additionally, habitat fragmentation is significant as well, and this is where we're cutting large habitat into small sections. Recently in Indiana, they just built Interstate 69 traveling from Bloomington all the way down to Evansville. And while that didn't destroy a lot of habitat, it cut a large habitat into small sections. And so that has a significant impact on animals wanting to get from one side of the interstate to the other. Many organisms can't cross the interstate effectively anymore due to fences and the threat of losing their life because of cars speeding along down the interstate. One interesting thing, though, about biodiversity is edge effect, where the edge of two ecosystems results in a very unique community. So if you've ever noticed walking alongside a pond or alongside a lake, you see a lot of different organisms that you don't see specifically within the lake or specifically within the forest. And that is because of edge effect. The two ecosystem creates a unique environment for certain organisms to live. So you see a lot of different organisms that are present on the edge of different ecosystems, and that's known as edge effect. Acid precipitation is a form of habitat degradation. As you can see in the picture on the right, the low pH, the high acidity of the rain actually burns the forest and burns the land. And this originates from pollution. The nitrates and sulfates that are produced by power plants or produced by industry are put into the atmosphere. That mixes with standard clouds and creates acid precipitation, which falls back down to the earth and can destroy the environment. Additionally, destruction of the ozone layer. The ozone layer helps protect us from the sun's rays, and the destruction of the ozone layer has caused a lot of problems for ecosystems because of the sun's rays penetrating and causing a lot of damage. You know, the UV rays that are present from the sun can cause skin cancer, and they can cause a lot of problems for other organisms as well. One of the main reasons that the ozone layer has been destroyed or has been partially destroyed is from the overuse of chlorofluorocarbons or CFCs. These chemicals go through and actually bind to the ozone that's present and cause it to leave the atmosphere. And that's bad for organisms because those UV rays can cause significant damage to many organisms. Another way that habitats have been degraded over time is by introducing something known as an exotic species. Exotic species are species that are not native to a specific area. So for example, kudzu is a plant that was brought over from Japan, and the plant was designed to, or was brought over to cover areas of interstates that did not have any vegetation growing on it. They didn't think it looked very good, and so the US government actually brought this over. What they didn't realize is that they didn't have any natural predators, so this thing continues to grow and grow and grow very rapidly because there are no natural predators to it. So as a result, the kudzu continues to grow unabated. And as a result, in the picture below, you see that it covers other trees, it covers light poles, it covers everything. It is a vine that will cover anything that's near it. And so as a result, other organisms can't get sunlight, other organisms can't pass through it, and causes significant problems to the ecosystem. We'll talk a little bit more about exotic species later on. So what are some ways that we are able to help conserve ecology and how we can conserve the environment? And one is using what are called habitat corridors. These allow for safe crossing along highways. So you see on the picture on the right, that is an example of a habitat corridor where animals can cross or can go across the top and not have to go across the road. So that just allows for safe crossing of highways and helps conserve our ecosystems. The second one and most important one is what's known as sustainable use, and that's using materials at the rate which they are created. Not overusing coal or natural resources for unnecessary purposes. Using them just enough for us to be able to survive is important to be able to have those resources for future generations. So sustainable use is one key way in which we can help conserve the environment and helps us preserve habitats and natural resources for many generations to come. So hopefully you're able to understand and explain biodiversity and why it's important to ecology, and be able to describe and understand threats to biodiversity and loss of ecosystems. We'll discuss some of these topics in a little more detail later on, and don't forget to take your video quiz and your mastery quiz over this particular subject. Have a great day. We'll see you guys later.